behind every silence battle lies a wave of stress, inner thoughts, biology, and the weight of our surroundings. Only by seeing the whole fabric can we understand how healing truly begins.
This is another one of those topics that the word itself is pretty modern. Um, Freud didn't have that work, and that was 100 years ago. But the experience of depression has been with humanity throughout its whole existence. Not evident in the academic text, of course, the word doesn't exist, but evident in art, in poetry, in narrative, in the descriptions of people. I think in many ways the idea that now we have a word for it and we can do something about it. That's what's new, and maybe that's why a lot of the focus today will be also around what to do and how it works, and what to try to deal with. So yeah, let's go for the trouble.
Make conscious the unconscious.
Hi, this is Josh.
This is Santi. Welcome to this session in the Mind Quest.
So the idea today was to talk about depression from the three perspectives that we usually have, right? The biopsychosocial approach. Bio means from the perspective of biology, from the perspective of the brain, the body, really. There is all, the entire body is involved with mental health. Psycho from the perspective of psychology, from the perspective of the abstract of language. We talked about history, art, and the social component of it, right? Like, well, we said this over and over again in many ways. If each person is a seed, the social environment is the soil in which that seed is growing. And in many ways, you can have the best seed possible if the soil itself is not conducive to growth, or if the soil itself is toxic. That seed will have a lot of trouble growing. And the opposite is also true. You may have a seed that is not the best ever, but it has a good enough soil that promotes its growth and lets it exist as any other plant. So that's kind of the idea for today. These multiple perspectives on what depression is from my clinical point of view, and what depression is in the way we use it in everyday life, I guess. So, yeah.
So, stress and a tough life experience can affect both the body and the mind. When challenges pile up, like long term pressure, past hurts, or unhealthy environments, they can change how the brain handles mood, energy, and motivation. These shifts aren't just emotional, they involve real physical process in the body. Understanding this mix of life events, biology, and social factors helps us see the bigger picture of why some people struggle more than others.
Yes. So this is the ChatGPT description of depression. Um, and this is, I think, what if you ask your family doctor, they would say your depression is. If you ask a friend, they would say this is depression. And in many ways, it is true, right? It is an accurate description of what depression is, but it misses the point that it is something obvious. Of course, depression is a change in the brain. Everything is a change in the brain. What else could be changing if not your brain? Like your soul? Obviously, depression is a change in the brain. Everything. Me talking generates a change in the brain. That's why talking is therapy, because there is nothing else other than your brain. So the act of talking, the act of thinking, is literally your neurons reorganizing their connection. Um, so, well, this is a great starting point. I think it's important to contextualize this. in the lens of clinical psychology, which is when you go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and you're evaluated, and we will, I mean, I don't think we've talked about evaluation yet, but evaluation is not the 10 question questionnaire, the PHQ-9 that your doctor will apply to you. That is a screening test. And usually, unfortunately, that's enough to get antidepressants in North America. That doesn't mean that you actually have depression. Like clinical depression implies a proper evaluation process, which is a lot more complex. Like you would have a battery of tests, you would have an interview, like a formal interview, where we talk about your life and how you've experienced life. We may talk to your family, we may talk to your husband, to your wife, we may talk to, we will gather a lot more information than the 10 questions questionnaire that most people will be familiar with. So, however, that doesn't really matter in real life. If your experience of life matches what you think is depression, that's enough. Like, unless you are trying to access government services and you need a diagnosis for something, it doesn't make sense to go through all of that for something that you yourself know better than everybody else. And in theory, this is why you only get the PHQ-9 and get antidepressants. Because you say you're depressed, the questionnaire says, yeah, you seem depressed, we don't need to go any further. That is functional, but not very helpful. It doesn't actually help you get better. You are not learning about what kind of needs you have and how to work on them. You are not learning about your different reactions to different triggers, and the whole process of actually making things better is not happening. It's just getting medication, and medication does help, but it is curiously, I would say, medication doesn't change your brain. It only changes the chemicals in your brain, but the connection between your neurons don't change. So literally, it's the opposite of what you're trying to do. Medication is there to let you do the work. We've said this over and over again, right? It is mental health requires work. Medications are there to get you to the point where you can do the work. Because obviously, if you are terribly depressed, cannot even get out of bed, you're not going to go to fucking therapy 30 minutes away from your house, right? Like, that's a lot to ask for somebody in that situation. Okay, sure, medication ideally lets you go to therapy. It doesn't cure depression. It doesn't uh, I don't know. It doesn't, like I said before, it doesn't actually change your brain. Talking does. So I kind of just also reveal to you what the treatment for depression is. It is the combination, usually, of medication to sort of get things started, to sort of get things going, and then psychotherapy to actually make the practical life changes. Because, I mean, unfortunately, as much as it hurts me to say this, yes, working out and having physical activity is healthy for you 99.9% of the time. So real lifestyle changes will also definitely help you. That's again only one half. You also need to do the actual psychological work of learning about yourself, of understanding yourself, and learning how to take care of yourself. In many ways, this comprehensive approach is the most effective. It is the least commonly used. Usually, you only get one of these three aspects. You either get meds, the easiest one. If you go to therapy with your insurance or through your work, you may have a few sessions, so you're going to get some practical advice. You don't get the third part, which is, I would say, in my biased opinion as a clinical psychologist, I would say this one is the most important one. Actually talking about your problems and actually working on knowing yourself and developing new strategies, new tools, rather than being dependent on medication or being dependent on look at 5 things that you can see, smell 3 things that you can smell. Okay, sure, but that doesn't solve the problem. So yeah, that's what I could say in terms of sort of depression as we use it in our everyday life. Depression as a clinical framework, I guess, and kind of how do we work on these different levels, right? Mm.
Yeah. So how we common mortals communicate is like sometimes our thoughts and habits can get trapped in sort of an unhealthy loops, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what get us there. Like overthinking, and you get this expecting the worst, or feeling powerless to change the situation, and these patterns don't appear out of nowhere. They reshape by our brain's work. What we've learned, however, uh, over this time, and how we cope with stress when we understand how these mental habits uh, form and how they guide our actions, we can start noticing that what keep us stuck and what can help us move forward. Um, this topic brings together ideas from, yeah, as you say, psychology and brain science and education, and even modern technology to show how the way we think shapes the way we feel and respond to the world.
What's a question? Was there a question there?
No, no, there's no question. There's just some part of the, you know, after starting with the investigation and getting to understand that there are more things involved in this situation nowadays than there were before.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm to think that when Freud was alive, he doesn't have to struggle with people getting depressed because they were watching to their phone, Graham Bell's phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe after wasting a lot of money and taking a picture at the time because it wasn't what they were expecting. Right? So,
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the thing that I think, right? I mean, maybe it's important to kind of make that distinction again, right? Like, okay, so I think this will be a way to say it. So, the way we use depression in our everyday life, that is not actually depression. That is just again, it's like when we talk about these words out of the cultural context, right? Like whenever I say oh, I am so depressed because I didn't get my new job, I am not actually talking about depression. I am kind of using that allegory as hyperbole of saying, oh my gosh, I'm so depressed, right? I would say yes, definitely that is very modern, right? Like definitely there's the things that makes us miserable in 2025 are different from the things that made us miserable in the 1900s. But I think it's important to kind of highlight the idea that like I don't want to say the feeling because that's not correct. The collection of symptoms, the collection of mental troubles, the collection of mental health challenges that when presented together, we now call clinical depression. Those have been there all along. So, for example, somebody who is maybe predisposed to depression. Let's say they have some genetic predisposition. Let's say they have had a rough childhood, a rough early life, a lot of trauma. When there is a lot of risk, let's say, for depression. Sure, maybe in the moment that their house burns down, that kind of triggers sort of this clinical depression sort of episode, let's say, it sort of brings all together into what we would diagnose as clinical depression. That can happen in 2025 just as easily as it could have happened in the 1900s. Right, like maybe, okay, sure, maybe not necessarily from falling off social media, but maybe on 2025 wife can understand their husband leaving for a military deployment. The same way somebody in Rome could understand, a housewife could understand their husband going out in a military deployment with the legions, right? So these both could be triggering elements if the person, like I said before, has the sort of correct predisposition, right? Like not every husband, not every wife will be sort of fall into depressive coma when their husband or the wife goes away. Like, that's not universal. So there is this predisposition element to all of these things. So yes, there is definitely influence from the context, but it's not the visible influence. It's not the event that happens. It is kind of everything else. It is kind of the society, the person, the history, their genetics, their cultural context, right? But yeah. Maybe with that we can bring it back to the 2025 and talk about what's going on in your mind today, or what you've been thinking about.
So, this is, I think it's a confusing topic just for what you just said.
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of times we use this interchangeably easy with I'm sad, so I'm depressed. It's the
Mhm.
same thing, but I do get now it's not necessarily the same thing.
Mhm.
You could be sad and depressed, or just sad, or just depressed.
Yeah.
They are not interchangeable like that. So I think we need to get to the basics, and by that I mean understanding that being depressed is not the same as being sad, or well, at least not necessarily the same.
No,
And
definitely not the same. Completely different. Definitely not the same.
okay, so it's much more complex than that.
Yes.
So first, I think we need to look at how to integrate that biological and environmental and social factors without emphasizing one side. I mean, it's not just this. I mean, it's not just because something is happening in your brain, but maybe also because something is happening in your surroundings, and also because something is happening with the people around you, or the absence of people around you. And so that in that way, maybe I can truly differentiate between sadness and real depression.
Mhm. Okay, so definitely us as third-party professionals do not overemphasize. However, odds are it's not going to be an equal distribution of weight for every person that you meet. For some people, the social component may have a much stronger weight than the personal genetic component. For some people, they may be more genetically predisposed to depression, while their environment isn't as toxic. So we don't try to impose that, but that also means we don't try to impose the balance either. If like balance is not like balance is not any more natural than unbalanced. So that's why we meet the person where they are. We ask them what how do they see the situation rather than us. So yes, that'll work fine. I said earlier that depression and sadness is completely different. Completely different. So the sadness, human emotion, completely natural. Some people experience it more intensely. Some people experience it less intensely. There are different cultural expressions of sadness. So sadness may look different in North America than it may look in Latin America, than it may look in Arab-speaking nations. So there is a lot of, again, all of these, what we feel inside is given shape by the culture we live in. So feeling universal, how that feeling looks like changes depending on the culture. Some cultures are much more expressive. Some cultures are much less expressive. But the emotion is universal. Depression, so the emotion is, sorry, so sadness is a natural component of human experience. Depression is not. Depression is a clinical word that humanity made up. Humanity looked at people and said, this, like many human beings, feeling this way, with this intensity, with these different characteristics, and this happens often enough that we can group them, all of these behaviors, feelings, expressions, whatever, we can group them all into a single concept that we can call depression. This is very literal. If you go to the DSM, and I think you can find this on Google. If you look for the DSM, the manual that psychiatrists and psychologists use for diagnosis, the entries for the different, and I was said pressure, but this is valid for all of them, are essentially a list of symptoms. And basically, I'd say most of the criteria is if your client meets, I don't know, let's say 4 out of the 6 of the symptoms, or if they meet these 2 with X level of intensity, then they have depression. Then they have this kind of depression. If this happens, but this doesn't happen, they have this kind of depression. So these words are completely artificial. These are taxonomic categorization that humanity has made to make it easier to understand and to make it easier to treat. And in 2025, in capitalist healthcare, to make it easier to bill. Because I would say a lot of the times nowadays, it is more about having the right code for insurance. But different topic, different topic. But so depression is I would say an academic concept or a clinical concept that changes over time. What sadness is doesn't change. Like, people have been sad for all of humanity. But depression changes. Depression was defined differently in the DSM-2 than in the DSM-3, and in the DSM-4, and in the DSM-5. Now we are in the DSM-5, I think, revised or something. But depression has changed every one of those times because depression is made up. We decide what depression is. And this is why evaluation is a requirement. Because the way you diagnose depression is also standardized. The tests are also standardized. The process that you use is also standardized. So that is sort of why sadness and depression are completely different. I would argue that sadness isn't even a clinical diagnostic criteria, because it has to be something more observable. So you have often things like behavior, like eating too little or eating too much, speaking too little or speaking too much. Absence of in terms of abulia, how do you say this without the factor? Lack of will to do things, like lack of enjoyment in things people used to enjoy. So all of these things are different, like criteria. Right? None of them means you are depressed. But if you have enough of them in enough intensity, you could be diagnosed with depression if you went through the adequate evaluation process. Does that make sense? This is very complicated. This is why we use depression the way we use it as an equivalent to sadness. Because what depression actually is incredibly complicated. Like, it requires sort of going into psychopathology and how do diagnoses work and how do evaluation work, and so on and so forth. I would say none of that matters. Because I am of the philosophy that what matters is the person in front of me. So I don't really care if you have depression or not. I care what your experience of life is and what we can do to make that experience of life better for you. If what you describe to me as your experience of life happens to match with the diagnosis of depression, great. We can look into that as a means to get more tools, more insight, different strategies to help you. But notice how you come first. I think every episode says this. The person comes first, and then we go to the diagnosis. Then we go to the tools. Then we go to everything else. First, we understand the person and what they need. And that's why it's important to take into account biopsychosocial factors. Your body, your mind, and your environment. Because that lets you help the person. It's not about the diagnosis is the least useful part. It's about understanding to help the person. That is kind of why all of these things are important. And kind of why all of them come into play. So yeah, I don't know if this makes sense.
Okay, so yeah, no. While you were actually speaking about all of this, I started overthinking. Well, no, maybe we talk about depression as sadness because depression in other contexts, not psychological,
Mm.
but in building, for example,
Mm.
and it's used in sculpting too.
Mm.
A depression is down under the level.
Mm-hmm.
So going down, at least in English, means you're sad,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you're down, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and as you said, yes, it's truly complex topic because when it comes to feeling better, there's no one size fits all solution, as you said. And I understand that in some cases medication is needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said that at the beginning, right?
Yes.
You said that so you can actually start therapy.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I've never gone that route.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I've gotten the idea that I might be living in a constant state of low grade depression.
Mm-hmm.
Although now I'm thinking that I should not be looking towards self diagnosing myself. After all, you said, but some symptoms are there, but they don't they don't stop me from functioning because I've heard a lot of this stuff that it stops you and you can move or you put that example that you can get out of bed to go 30 minutes walk to get to your psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
So and even though I'm often forcing myself to keep going,
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's not natural. Yeah, I even feel the urge to keep going. It's just I need to force myself.
Mm-hmm.
uh, so I don't know if I actually need treatment. And to be honest, I'm afraid of medication.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have friends in university that, you know, in my many years in the art school, some colleagues fall into using these drugs as actually entertainment. So I'm afraid of what it can do in the long term to your brain, because at some point something might change, and I think that's not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So what evidence do you look for to determine whether someone is depressed and whether the case might be biological or psychological, especially with the biological part? Because I mean, you need what, like blood test? How you know that it's a biological factor?
You don't. There is no difference. Like, remember what I said earlier? Like, we make the distinction between biological and psychological as an academic distinction, so we can study them, so we can talk about them. But there is only your brain. There is nothing else. So it's all biological. Like there is no metaphysical component to you. I mean, well, I don't know. Maybe you don't have a soul. I don't know. But at least in terms of what psychology understands, there is no metaphysical component to what you are, to your personality or anything like that. Everything has to be encoded somehow in your neurons and the connection they establish with each other. So while we make this distinction in sort of in practice of psychological and the biological component, when you talk and suddenly feel better because oh my gosh, I let everything out, what you're feeling is that your brain has reorganized in a way that feels like that. Do you see what I'm saying? Like there is no, I would say there is no psychological component. Like everything is biological. The thing is that there are two ways to sort of affect the brain. One way to affect it is physical, using chemicals, drugs, medication. The other way is, I would say, abstract. It's metaphysical. It's by getting your brain to change itself. Okay. That's it.
So
There is nothing else.
you get a brain scan and you say, "Oh no, this guy is depressed."
No, you haven't done
There's
that.
no way to do something like that.
No, because your brain looks like it's like looking at a hard drive. You cannot see the information from the hard drive just looking at it. You have to, even if you looked at it at the microscopic level, what you're seeing is the physicality of it, but the information is encoded in its physical shape. The same thing with your brain. You can look at the brain and you will see neurons and their connections. But the information of what you are is encoded inside those connections. And that we cannot decipher. I mean, we can by talking. So do you see? So we make this distinction between what is psychological and what is biological. But that is not a distinction of what is being changed. It's a distinction of how your brain is being changed. It is being changed either by the physical component of medication, the biological component, or is it being changed by the sociological, linguistic component, the abstract psychological component of talking, of experiencing, right? If I don't know, if I make a plane and the plane crashes, that experience traumatizes me. Trauma is a physical change in the brain, but that is what it is. It is my brain physically changing by the sensory stimulus I received. When people say, oh my gosh, I read, I watched, I saw this work of art, and it changed my life. It changed their brain. Because that's what sensory stimulus does. That's what learning is. We perceive a stimulus, and that stimulus changes your brain. There's nothing else. Like, do you see what I mean? Like, there's no abstract component to learning. Whatever you learn has to be somewhere in your brain. So if you fall off a building and hit your head, you will forget. Because physically, the information is no longer there. I think that's a very interesting distinction to make. When we talk about psychology and biology, we're not talking about the brain having two components. We're talking about two ways to affect the brain. Well, three, and if we include society and environment.
It's also it means that not like it actually happens when, for example, those hard drugs that actually melt your brain, your physical brain start to melt.
Yes.
You lose like gray matter, right?
Yes. Yes. Either the connection between your neurons get pruned or neurons start dying, things like that. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
For example, after some time, you may be able to see the changes that drugs make in the brain. That is actually something you can see with brain imaging. Because the change is so dramatic that you can see it visually. But again, it's the brain. It's just your brain changing. There is no metaphysical component. So, whenever we say, for example, earlier, right, and we get trapped into loops, these are literal loops. These are connections between your neurons that have been reinforced so much that your brain is having trouble pulling them back. So they are literally stuck together. So a lot of the work we do by talking and practicing and developing new skills has to is literally weakening this connection and strengthening new connection. So whenever we say that like psychology work, it literally is. We are literally using words to reorganize the neurons in your brain. And then we go back to this idea of it's impossible going to change. So everything changes the order of your neurons a little bit. That's why you have memories, because everything leaves an impression.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. So last part of the question. So how do you differentiate between depression and sadness if you don't it's following the brain? Well, like I said before, depression has a very clear diagnostic criteria. To summarize them, like I always do, they are about the intensity and frequency. So if you have felt sad for more than I think it's 6 months, with no change in emotion and no other like possibilities, no other factors that could be causing the sadness, I think that's one of the core criteria for diagnosis, right? There are a lot. You have to have a few of them, not a single one. Again, if I don't know, somebody dies, yeah, it's normal to be super sad for the next week. If you are so sad that you want to kill yourself, okay, that's a little too intense. So we may need to look at maybe a screening test, like if this is something that's happening now, how this been going on along. So again, it is very much objective. Like depression is super objective. Depression is defined by the DSM-5. Sadness is not. Sadness is a human emotion. It appears in art, but it is not defined in the DSM-5. Literally, explicitly. Sadness does not appear as a component of depression because you would have to define sadness first.
Okay, it makes a lot of sense now.
Mm-hmm.
But the complex pattern is actually taking it out of your vocabulary as a common expression about sadness, right?
I would say not sweat it. Like I would say don't not destroy yourself over that. Like I think the easiest thing to do is kind of the opposite. Like you just accept that people use depression in this way And this is just clarify that most people are not talking about clinical depression when they say depression.
Well, yes, but also in that way that talking about how words actually build yourself,
Mhm.
knowing actually that depression is actually more complex than just being sad,
Mhm.
and that maybe at some point might be like affecting your own self because you are repeating this loopy word about being sad instead of being depressed, or being depressed instead of being sad. So at some point you maybe get depressed, right? Because you're building it up on yourself.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. We have said this before, language construct, language create. It is very much a possibility that if you keep repeating to yourself, I'm depressed even if you're not, as time goes on, you may start changing things in a way that you fit the criteria of depression. Yes. So that is definitely a possibility. I think that in terms of self definition, it is important to have a clear idea of the difference between sadness and depression, like I said. Mm.
Yep. So there's something that still makes me think there are traces of depression in me,
Mm.
even though I know most of these things are not there. And
Yeah,
it is
that's
that
normal. That's normal.
I
You want to say
always
that everybody has some like characteristics
some
of
level of
everything.
depression.
Yes, it is. You can always find something of yourself in the DSM-5. Like that's normal. Everybody has something. That's also why I like talking of sort of different symptoms or like a collection of symptoms rather than a specific diagnosis, because it makes it easier to actually talk and communicate and look at the DSM or things like that.
Yeah, you know what? Because I'm always in this mood of expecting the worst.
Mm.
So I've grown myself to believe that that is being prepared for whatever outcome comes from any situation, but it actually makes me overthink some stuff and be
Mm.
always in a strategy mood or around any situation. So
Mm.
uh, I got used. Maybe it's maybe it's because I got used to disappointment,
Mm.
like either from childhood expectations or later in adult relationships. And this got me thinking on how do my own cultural and socioeconomic perspectives shape the way I interpret inequality
Mm.
and mental health. Am I? I mean, am I recognizing the full scope of social factors influencing how I feel?
No, nobody does. Like nobody has a full assessment of their cultural baggage. It's a little bit of this idea of the eye cannot see itself, right? So we can definitely do our best to be aware of our biases and to be aware of our like cultural prejudices or whatever. But we are also human. Like we are not going to be fully aware, enlightened beings. So I know all my flaws and how to go. Like everybody has aspects of ourselves that we either cannot or don't want to see. And that is again, it becomes a problem when it is either too intense or too frequent, right? Like otherwise, it is just part of being human. I think, but I think you are going into something very important here, and I think that's a lot of the work around evaluation, right? Like why evaluation is important. One of the key things that you learn as a clinical psychologist, and I think in this way it's similar to medicine, is differential diagnosis, right? The same way that if you say my stomach hurts, any person can give you like some like basic pills or some tea or something to help your stomach. But if your stomach doesn't stop hurting and you need to figure out what it is, then you need a doctor. And what the doctor does is sort of go through the evidence to either confirm or discard different hypotheses of what's going on with you until they figure it out and they can help you. With things like mental health diagnosis, what the psychologist does is very similar. Right? So you would come to the office and say, hey, I've been feeling really sad, or maybe you'd say, I've been feeling really depressed for the past 2 months. My work as a clinical psychologist would be like, okay, let's figure out why. and if this is something that is going on now or has been happening for a long time. You said something as well about perception, right? Maybe the person says, "Oh, it's very recent, very recent." I have a reason, and they say, "Oh, that's 10 years." Okay, like, okay, sure, that's recent for you. I mean, sure, that's okay. For the DSM, that's not recent. For the DSM, that's a history of depression, right? So again, that's why I'm asking things, right? Because I'm trying to sort of compare them to the diagnostic criteria. Um, But the purpose of that is to figure out the best way to help you. If I can figure that out without having to do the whole evaluation process, because either you already have the answer or it's not as severe, we can use some generic technique like 5 things you can see, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can hear. We'd rather do that than go through the whole evaluation process. So it's not always necessary to do the evaluation. That's kind of the point here as well. The goal is not to evaluate, the goal is to help you. Sometimes, to help you, we will need to evaluate you. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes, if you say, I'm depressed, you are depressed. We don't need the evaluation. Does that make sense?
So weird because it sounds like I know, but I don't know.
No, you do know. That's the point. You always know better. Because it doesn't matter how good I am at evaluating, I'm not with you 24/7. I do not see your innermost secret personal thoughts. So you are the authority on yourself. No amount of information I have is going to be more than what you have. Does that make sense? And that's again when we go to this idea of empowering. That's why it's more important for me to give you the tools than for me to do the evaluation. No, that makes sense? Because you have the information. Evaluation is the best method I have to put information on the table so that we can see it. But ideally, if you can learn how to see yourself, that's the best way to do it. Because that's only you have access to all the information. Well, most of it. You're cautious by the side, you don't have
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Everything, but yeah.
I guess we're not intentional trying to hide information from ourselves, but I mean, there might be some issues that might actually put them aside. You don't
Exactly.
actually remember. Yeah.
Exactly. Or something that we just cannot see, like I said before. Everybody has some biases that they cannot see.
So, in keeping in this idea, how much of what I do on a daily basis contributes to developing actually depression?
Mm,
There are things that feel complicated to talk about,
mm,
like sexual habits, for example,
mm,
or smoking,
mm,
or other behaviors used as stress relievers.
mm,
Yeah. And then there's the most modern one, like grabbing my cell phone and doom scrolling it down through videos and social media. And well, how might these behaviors actually shape the way I understand my emotional patterns?
mm.
Uh, how can I be critical and evaluate the models I tend to rely on? Because this is something that from modern days, I mean, we're following models that might be responsible for what we're feeling at the end.
I mean, I think there are a few ways to look at that. Because I don't know if Freud would say that the models make you think. I think Freud would say that you pick the model based on. But okay, let me focus a little bit. Okay, let's start with the first thing you said about being critical. I would say if you feel something is not right, and that's your signal that something is not right. Right, so I would say the way you do it is by trusting yourself. If you're like, I don't know if watching TikTok for hours a day is very healthy, trust yourself. Like, go with what you're thinking. Like, there's a reason why you're thinking. So kind of go with it, right? Maybe there is something that you may want to look at if you are having that feeling, right? But the first element I would say is sort of give yourself that authority to say, you know what, I do maybe know a little bit about myself, so maybe if I'm feeling this way, there is a reason for me to be feeling this way. And I would also say try to avoid the opposite, right? Like maybe like where you say, if watching 1 hour of TikTok a day, you are like, yeah, it's okay. Also, be also sort of I don't know, like sort of chill with yourself, right? Like if you are also not feeling that this is a problem, don't look for it. Like don't try to force yourself into saying, "Oh, this is about habit," because people say it's about habit. Because this is very common. Because I read an article that said this is about habit. Like I would say, don't go the other way. Like don't look for more problems. Like you will get enough problems in life just by existing. So don't give yourself more problems if you don't need to, right? So I would say that in terms of sort of finding a balance between self critique, but also, don't make that critique cause problems when there aren't, right? So I would say that on one side. So, sort of the secret to self critique is to listen to yourself, but also do not push yourself into finding problems where there are not, right? This is a lot harder than it sounds. A lot of the time, our own expectations or the expectations of our immediate environment, the expectations that we have like for life or like for what life should be. Very often these become these sort of what would be a nice word to use? These sort of placebo. We were talking about motivation last session. They become these placebo motivation that aren't really intrinsic. They are extrinsic. It is other people who want me to. It's other people. So that's not sustainable. We were talking about that last time. If the motivation doesn't come from inside, it's not sustainable. So again, like don't push yourself if it doesn't come. Like I'm sure there are other things that you can work on yourself than that particular thing. I don't know if that answers the question. Okay.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, because that's a common thing. I mean, when it comes to the mind, most of the time we're trying to solve it on our own. Uh, and maybe the thing that is that if we, what you said, if we are feeling like something is not going as it's supposed to, maybe it's a better idea to check on a professional or some extra help than just trying to find out.
Yeah.
That's
Yes, because it's a matter of perspective, right? It's like I said before. If there are aspects of yourself that you cannot see, that's why a professional is useful because they may be able to see it. But it's not that they have the power now. It's that they are helping you. They are your assistant. No, that makes sense. That's why this is the healer guild, not the DPS guild, not the tank guild, because we are support, right? We are there. You are the one that have to do the work. We're there to support you, not the other way around. And that works for every mental health professional.
good. Well, thank you, Josh. Let's get to some frequently asked questions now. And some of these are a lot of repeating stuff because I think we've cleared them out in this process. But I think we can put them in short terms so we can actually take something out from this and try to actually use our language in a more adequate way,
Okay,
maybe, or maybe I don't know, connect better with this whole idea. So
okay.
the first one is what exactly is depression and how it is different from sadness. So we talked about it already, but in simple words, how would you put it?
Okay. Depression is a clinical diagnosis that is objectively defined by the DSM-5 or by the ISCD, right? By these manuals of mental illness, essentially, that all codify all mental health diagnoses. So this is an academic word that is perfectly defined. Everybody can look it up in the DSM. Sadness is a human emotion that all humans feel and have felt for the history of humanity that is not properly defined in any academic book or text. but that you can probably experience or see or appreciate through art. You would be able to find sad music. You would be able to find sad art. You would be able to find sad poems. And you will be able to feel what sadness is. I cannot tell you the effect, but you can figure it out.
Okay, so out of the way, what causes depression?
So depression doesn't have a single cause. The same way that depression has multiple characteristics. It has multiple factors that play into the diagnosis that we call depression. Generally speaking, it will be a combination of your genetics, just the way your brain is through your DNA, your social environment, the places where you grew up, your family, your friends, the groups of people that you hang out with, and your psychological development, right? The way your mind, as you the speaker, has been configured through your life experiences. Just to highlight, we make this distinction between your brain and your mind. They are the same thing, just different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, I love how internet oversimplifies things through questions, because the next one is, how is depression treated?
Okay. How is depression treated? Okay. The exact way it will change depending on the person and their symptoms. However, generally speaking, the most effective interventions seem to be a combination of medication and psychotherapy and behavioral sort of lifestyle change, right? So you do things like working out, keeping a journal, eating better, going to the doctor, have your body checked out. You would, if needed, like we said before, sometimes medication is needed. Take medication. You would coordinate it with your psychiatrist, probably. And you would also go to therapy. So you would go to a psychologist, a counselor, a social worker who ideally has some experience or specialization with depression. And you would essentially talk to them. Remember that again, talking is literally changing your brain. So that is the work that actually helps you get better.
Dude, can someone recover from depression fully?
No, I would say, um, I would say in general, I mean, I was gonna say, okay, the question is recover, but is recover fully? Um, okay, so I would say cure, where they are gonna disappear now. That was one of the first things I actually learned in uni. For the idea that in general, I mean, I guess some people do, but in general, psychology and definitely psychoanalysis don't have to speak about cures. Or the idea that you know the same way that you could cure a flu or the same way you could cure I don't know, COVID, I guess. Because there is nothing to cure, right? Like remember, it's just your brain, and we already said this in previous sessions. You cannot go back. You cannot rewind your brain into something that it was before. So cure is impossible, right? The same way you can get rid completely of a flu, you cannot like get rid completely of the way your brain has the structure. Like there's just no physical way to do it. It is impossible. Like there's no way to manipulate the brain in such a way. Maybe in 100 years, now maybe. So I would say it's not really about curing or recovering fully. I would say it is about recovery. I think that's the word for the recovery. I think there's definitely healing. There is definitely getting better. There's definitely learning to manage. There's definitely getting to a point where it doesn't affect your life in any way. But I wouldn't call it a cure, right? Because people are not monolithic. But the fact that it doesn't affect your life in any way right now doesn't mean that it won't affect your life in any way 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, where your dog cat dies, where your cat dies, when you get fired, like it may happen again. So I wouldn't call it a cure. But you cannot recover. And you can recover many times, right? Maybe you have a crisis, you recover. You have a crisis, you recover. Cure to me means cure. It means it's gone. As I was saying, no, there is no like fully recovered. There is no cure, but there is definitely recovery. That's what I would say that.
I get it. I also mean the word is like wrong because recovering also requires going back somehow to a previous state that was actually good one.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, I'm to think that our brains are like in constant evolution; they are changing. So you maybe are rewiring yourself
Yep,
somehow or
yep,
hijacking, but you're not recovering. You're making a different connection so you
yep,
can pass on through this, right?
yep. And the
Uh,
way we say this from the other side is re-symbolizing. Whenever I say we are
hmm,
re-symbolizing, that means
that's a
your
good definition.
neurons are reorganizing. Again, there's two different ways of saying the same thing.
Yeah. And our last one says, how can I help a friend or loved one with depression?
Hmm. So this is complicated because the depression can look in many different ways. And not everybody can be helped by a regular person. Um, Depression can be so heavy that a regular person trying to help would result in two depressed people rather than in one depressed person getting better, right?
Okay.
So, and I think this is valid for a lot of mental health situations, right? Like, I give this example very often as well. If you're at home making lunch and you cut your finger, sure, you can have your partner, your child, your sister, your neighbor, whatever, help you do some basic first aid. If you roll down the stairs and break a leg, you wouldn't call your partner, your son, your neighbor to help you fix your leg. You will ask them to take you to the hospital. This is kind of the idea here as well. Right? Like, if somebody is in a depressive crisis, they likely need professional help. So being there is all you can do. Literally, you say, "Hey, I'm here if you need me. You can always call me. Here's my phone. Do you want me to stay? Well, right? Or maybe I will stay because you look pretty bad, so I'm gonna leave you alone." Those things, like being present. That would be, like I said, the most severe case, right? Where you make yourself available and try to help them get professional help. Um, it's not always that severe. I usually think of the extreme because most of my career was with severe mental illness, but it's usually not that severe. In that case, I'd say sort of encouraging and empowering, I mean, I keep saying this, the person to sort of take control and ownership of their mental health condition is kind of the way. So, uh, psychoeducation, maybe you can help them learn more about depression. Maybe you can send them this podcast. Maybe you can, do those sort of more educational things. Maybe you can, like I said before, maybe encourage things like maybe you do go to therapy anyways. You can encourage things like lifestyle changes, like I said before. Maybe go out more, work out more. Let's pick up a hobby together, like that kind of thing. From where you are sort of enriching their life, essentially. That's something you can do. Um, but notice how none of these recommendations have anything to do with talk to them about their depression and what they are fat. That's not your job. Obviously listen to them if they want to talk to you, but your job is not to talk about like their life traumas. That's for a professional to do. Because like I said before, depression, especially, can be really, really heavy in the listener. So if you are not careful and this is a severely depressed person, you can end up making it worse for yourself and therefore for both of you. So I would say be careful. There's a lot of responsibility around uh, taking care of somebody with depression. I don't think you should shy away from it either. Like I think definitely, if somebody with depression, they can definitely benefit from having somebody they can trust. But I think it's important to have very clear boundaries for yourself, right? So this is as much as I'm willing to do. This is where we call 911 or where we go to a professional, right? Because unfortunately, like I said before, in 2025, a lot of people are in a vulnerable situation where all they need is a little push and they are now another person that needs to go to therapy. So important to be careful. Important to sort of take care in a way that does not affect yourself.
Very well. Well, there it is. Well, as we said in each and every week, we'd love to hear from you on the other side of the screen. Um, we're going to do some changes during next week, so maybe we'll get to the surprises soon enough. Um, let's see what happens. So stay tuned for whatever's up to come next.
Yeah, as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Please don't forget to follow us on YouTube, on social media. And as always, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Well, now that you see how many forces shape how we feel, take one small action today. Your future self will thank you.
Yeah. I think the idea here is just be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and have good boundaries. That's probably a good recommendation. Thank you for everything.
Till next time.
See you. Take
Bye.
care. Bye bye.